Good afternoon. Today is Friday, June 5th, and it's actually the birthday of my business partner and co-founder of the MECCA Group, Dr. Keisha Mack. So let's say happy birthday to Dr. Keisha Mack. I am Dr. Mercedes Ebanks, co-founder of the MECCA Group. Thank you for joining me today for another MECCA moment. After a tough 2 weeks of protests and a long 10 weeks of a pandemic, we're going to engage today in a much needed conversation addressing Black men, how to heal and find emotional wellness. Today, I welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Jeff Menzise, life coach and educator. Hi, Dr. Jeff Menzise.
Ebanks, how you doing, sis?
I'm doing well. So I would like to introduce Dr. Jeff and all of his fine accomplishments. He's a proud graduate of two of the finest HBCUs. He received a bachelor's in psychology as well as a master's in clinical psychology from Fisk University. He finished up his academic training at Howard University, majoring in clinical psychology with a minor in developmental psychology. Along with his PhD, Dr. Menzise earned a graduate certificate in international studies with a concentration in political science and information and culture. He's a native of Cincinnati, Ohio. He maintains his professional and social ties to his hometown by serving as a consultant to several grassroots organizations, educators, and his fraternal affiliations. Masonically, Dr. Menzise is a proud member of the St. John's Lodge No. 3 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and he is a member of the Phylaxis Society. He is also actively involved globally and locally. He has worked with ministries of education in both the Caribbean and West Africa. He has recently been invited to work directly with Taraji P. Henson and her foundation, the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, which she named after her father, who experienced challenges with mental health symptoms. Along with Ms. Henson, he has co-hosted a community town hall meeting to address mental health access and overcoming the barriers and stigma and affordability. The features are on Facebook and they're titled Make It Plain. As a scholar, Dr. Menzise has presented a multitude of papers and workshops around the world and has co-authored 10 books. He is the creator of a hit radio show, Mind on That Matter. He is currently an associate professor with the Morgan State University Institute for Urban Research and is immediate past president of the Association of Black Psychology, the DC chapter. And the Association of Black Psychology is actually celebrating its 52-year anniversary of its creation. Dr. Menzise, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Right on, Mercedes. I really appreciate the invitation.
Wonderful. So let's just dive straight into the conversation. I've known Dr. Menzise for for the past year, and certainly am aware of the work that you're doing. We've had several conversations about just the mental health stigma, and how that is affecting or has affected the Black and Brown people. But because of the recent occurrences that has been highlighted in the news this past 2 weeks with the unfortunate death of George Floyd and so many that have been victims of crimes by police officers that have been, again, highlighted because they've been captured on video, but there were so many other incidents that have not. The conversation that we really want to have today is focused around Black men and how can they heal and find emotional wellness during these times.
Yeah, and it's very important because it's a lot, like you're saying, there's a lot going on. The deck is really stacked. And, being a Black man myself, I feel it coming from several angles. Like you're saying, it's not only coming from police brutality, but also see the replaying of those videos in the media, social media, mainstream media, on TV, even in print. I see the replaying of these events as an assault as well, meaning that, you know, we're being re-traumatized. There's being a consistent message being delivered. And it just seems that, you know, we as men of African descent are being targeted for one reason or another. And so, I mean, this discussion is very timely. I talk to brothers every day, all day, whether they're trying to negotiate, you know, how to deal in their relationships, intimate partner relationships, how they're trying to deal with, you know, their parents, how they're trying to deal with the job place, you know, so it's very timely, you know, and I really commend you all at MECCA for calling this conversation together. Whether they're trying to negotiate.
You know, the 2020 started off rather rough, you know, with the untimely death of even Kobe Bryant, and starting to look at, you know, how that impacted, you know, Black men, you know, someone that many people grew up with, you know, idolized, you know, saw as from a family man to a philanthropist to a, you know, star basketball player, and how that has impacted men. And then again, we're talking about young men developing, you know, their sons, you know. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. And so what you're pointing out is the, you know, the loss factor in all of this, the, you know, traumatic relationship to loss. When Kobe transitioned, again, it was shocking. You know, my son actually is the one that told me. He came down like, Baba, Kobe died. I was like, man, quit playing. What? And when I began to do the research and actually look for the validity of his statement, I mean, I believed him because it's my son. He wouldn't just lie to me. But, you know, it was, you know, that whole denial piece as far as the stages of grief. And what happens is that this brother, he was held up, you know, in such high esteem. He had status. He had a work ethic about him. You know, he was all these different things that we could model. And so, yeah, that loss in and of itself was major for a lot of people. I think what I dealt with the most being a father myself is the fact that his daughter was with him. You know, I couldn't, you know, it was hard for me to even just deal with what those final seconds would be like, you know, going down, understanding that this is imminent death and, you know, embracing your daughter as you was. That's how I'm imagining that it went down. And so, yeah, so, you know, again, Kobe's death. So there's been a lot going on in 2020, but, you know, it's still just a continuation of what's been happening for, you know, over the last 400 years or so. You know, when we talk about enslavement, because, you know, what's happening today is, in fact, a continuation from that historical occurrence. You know, so it's historical and ongoing trauma that we're experiencing here.
Yeah, certainly. So what would you say is the number one issue impacting Black men's mental health and emotional well-being the most?
If I had to pick one thing, I'm gonna say that it's racism and white supremacy. And I know that sounds like the cliche blanket response, but I mean, I couldn't pick anything else. I see several things spinning off from that, you know, that system, you know, because racism, white supremacy is a system of oppression that's designed to maintain white superiority over non-white inferiority. And so when you look at how that's playing itself out, it plays itself out in economics. It plays itself out in education. It plays itself out in entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. gave us those nine areas of people activity. And so when you look at how, you know, Black men have to perform and how we have to negotiate, you know, ourselves in each of those 9 areas, it becomes a heavy, you know, for us to try to not only understand what's happening to us, but also prevail against what's happening to us, especially those of us that come from more of a traditional background where we say that, you know, that men are supposed to be leaders in their community. And when you have situations in your community that are directly opposing your ability to be a leader, and then when those types of energies and assaults bleed over into your family, you know, into the household. And so, you know, a lot of people, you know, take it for granted that Black men are actually carrying a serious burden, and it's very heavy for many of us, regardless of how we look. And that's why I always, you know, I push back very strongly against people trying to say whose burden is the heaviest when they try to start that battle of the sexes conversation. You know, we'll never win doing it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly agree. And even looking at the effects of the pandemic, you know, we unfortunately, you know, the Black and brown people are disproportionately passing away as a result of, you know, of COVID-19. The impact on wealth in terms of unemployment, loss of small businesses, also in terms of the family relationships and and the impact of, whether it's, domestic violence and substance abuse, and again, the lack of education. We also know that there are many children who don't have access to the internet. The school system might have not supported them in all of their needs, because of the transition to now having to, be at home and distance learning, access, to a computer. Do you feel like all of those factors have contributed to the numbers and this timing of this protest, along with, again, looking at Aubrey Ahmaud, George Floyd, all of those? Do you think, like, now it's almost an explosion, a wake-up call that all of this is disproportionately affecting the Black and brown people, but certainly Black men?
Right. Yeah. You can't forget to say Sister Brianna's name. I know we talk about Black men, but she's as much a part of this energy that's moving forward as the two brothers are. What we're looking at here is that I see things in as big a picture as possible. I'm looking at how, it's always used the hashtag chess, not checkers, to show that, you might not understand how this immediate move relates to 4 or 5 moves down the line. But if you got the chess mentality, then you're always looking for that relationship. And so when we look at, the COVID-19 pandemic, the slowly but surely escalating of the restrictions, right? So, every day was a new restriction, the confusion around the symptoms, the confusion around how it's being transmitted, all those different things, and then ultimately culminating in the quarantining, right? And when you quarantine large bodies of people who aren't, quote unquote, used to being quarantined for a stretch of time, and then it's like a pressure cooker. So now we're quarantining this pressure cooker, right? And the pressure is building up. You mentioned some things about domestic violence and home-based situations that may not be the healthiest for the adults or the children in that environment. You start to get all these pressures to build up. Frustration is growing. Then all of a sudden you light that fuse. Boom! Not by the murder of the people that have been murdered, but by the publicizing of that murder. Because there are people dying each and every day, some at the hands of law enforcement and others at the hands of other citizens. And so it was not the murder itself, but it was the promotion of it, the pushing of it that was lighting that fuse that said, all right, now we can't stay in anymore. Let's get out there on the streets. And, some people I call myself a cynic sometimes, because I'm always looking for that angle. And part of me feels that, understanding psychology the way that I do, part of me feels that, some of this was actually contrived. It was calculated to a degree to where, that you can get people emotionally riled up, keep them bottled up and then release them at a certain time. And so on the flip side of this pressure that we're experiencing right now is that, COVID-19 is still very much real global pandemic. Pandemic means global. So it's still very much a pandemic, right? And so when you see what's happening in these close quarters, people protesting, not practicing physical distancing, my fear and concern is that what we have experienced as far as restrictions are going to be revisited, and it's going to be to the 25th power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly areas of concern, and again, how this is going to prolong. What is the rest of 2020 going to look like? With that, how does a man's emotional well-being translate into his overall functioning, into his relationships? How do men prepare for how these factors that you just shared are contributing to their overall well-being?
Very, very, very important point. It's like when you look at a man's emotional maturity and emotional health, what you're looking at is his core disposition, which then determines how he's going to respond and react to everything else that's going on around him. There's an ancient Egyptian or a Kemetic or African proverb that says emotions make poor leaders, but great servants. And I'll say it again, they make poor leaders, but great servants. And so if you're being led by emotion, like meaning that if you're following your heart, if you are, if you're doing things out of anger, if you're doing things seeking pleasure, if you're doing things because you're scared, a lot of times those things aren't necessarily well thought out. And most times they're knee jerk, right? You're following impulse in most of those situations. But if you use emotions as a tool and as a servant to get things done, then what you have done is you've mastered the emotional state. And so there's an old system called Stoicism, right? And it's accredited to the Greek Marcus Aurelius. I believe it's Marcus Aurelius who they accredit that to. It's Stoicism. In the ancient African tradition in Egypt, it was called Men-Eb, or a stable heart. And so Stoicism and Men-Eb, what they talk about are being able to stabilize your heart, meaning that you are emotionally triggered by anything. And again, it doesn't mean that you're emotionless. It just means that you can't be controlled by your emotion. So nobody can come up and push a button because you don't have any buttons to push. Or if you do have buttons to push, they're few and far in between, and it's going to take a heck of a reach to get to them. And so when a man enters a relationship without having done any of his emotional work, meaning unpacking some of the emotional baggage that may relate to his early life experiences, or if he hasn't dealt with some more recent emotional trauma, or emotional experiences that he's had, then what you do is it's like you carrying around like gasoline and you're constantly trying to light a cigarette with a blowtorch. And it's a very volatile and flammable type of situation. And so when a man has mastered emotions, he enters into interactions and situations masterfully. When a man has not mastered his emotions and they're kind of just wayward and he could pop off at any moment in whatever direction, then what you have is a volatility, and you have the potential for conflict no matter where that person is.
Okay. So how does that work happen? So what are the ways that men can begin to heal that emotional trauma and develop a mental well-being to get to those points in that state that you speak of?
Yeah. And so one of the first things to do is acknowledge that there's work to be done. Because a lot of us don't realize that we actually have work to do. We think that we are okay. We like, shoot, I mean, I'm successful. I'm making six figures. I got a job. I'm in school. I graduated high school. We think that because we have met milestones that we are actually functioning properly or appropriately, or even to our maximum ability, because some are functioning quite well, even with their baggage. And for some, the emotional trauma actually fuels their movement. And so it works out differently for different people. But the way that we begin to do this work is to acknowledge that there's work to be done and that the work is not easy. It's going to take a full commitment on the part of the men. And because we're in a village situation, it's going to also take a full commitment on the part of everybody around us, who benefits from our presence, who would like to benefit from our presence, and whose presence we benefit from. And so in a household, like say if it's two people, it's a man and woman, they're married, and this brother he's committed to doing his emotional work. It's for everybody else in the household not to walk on eggshells and hold his hand while he's doing the work, but acknowledge that the work is being done. And it's also best for everybody else in that cipher to do their work as well, because people like it ain't vulgar, but people who take a shower and then get on the toilet, that's backwards, right? Or we talk about we come in the house smelling like outside, or you don't take a shower just to go outside and get dirty, but it's that kind of thing where you might be doing the healing work, but then you come back into a toxic situation and you have to do the work all over again. But the first step is to acknowledge that there's work to be done. The second step is to build up the courage to actually do that work, and also seek support from other people who know about that work and get that guidance as you need it.
And when you speak of seeking assistance to help you get to and guide you to do that work, are you speaking of mental health therapists? Are you speaking of life coaches like yourself? What are ways that men can find that help and seek that help? Because I think, again, the stigma of going to a therapist, especially within the Black community, is typically looked negatively upon. There's you have to be, crazy, or there has to be, or almost that it has to be mandated to do it. How can men do it on their own? How can they find, support? Does it have to be a therapist?
Right.
A psychologist?
Yeah. So life coaching, therapists, clinicians, counselors, all of that is very, very important. And yeah, the stigma is there. And that's a part of, what we're doing, as you mentioned earlier with the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation. We got that no stigma campaign right now, because we understand that, as you understand over at MECCA, y'all doing the work, y'all on the front lines with this, that people resist it because we think that we're crazy if we go to see a therapist. We're crazy if you go see a counselor. You're crazy if you go see a life coach. But life coach is a little bit, more sexy and acceptable than going to see a therapist or whatever. But yeah, I say brothers should not try to do it on their own. they should always try to seek assistance, because to me, that's actually a sign of strength and courage to seek out help, when you need it, because you're making yourself vulnerable. But I do understand why brothers avoid it and why Black people in general avoid it. I did my master's thesis on cultural mistrust. And when I was doing the research on that, it's a survey that was created, an inventory created by Dr. Francis Terrell down in Texas. He's at the University of North Texas. But we're looking at how there's mistrust of established systems by Black people, the healthcare system being one of them. And if you look at the history, Harriet Washington has that book called Medical Apartheid, where she details greatly all of the hardships visited upon Black people at the hands of medical professionals. And so, it's not just, by happenstance that we don't trust systems, that we don't trust making ourselves vulnerable to people who can and who are highly trained to manipulate us, especially psychologically. And so it makes sense. And that's why we got to have more culturally competent mental health providers. And that's one thing I do. I train mental health providers. I train them at the university level. I train them as a consultant. I do all of this stuff because we got to be able to do this work, and we got to be able to do it right for the people that we're claiming that we want to help. And so, brothers, man, get that help, and, at the barbershop ain't enough. Although, one of my colleagues, Afia and Billy Shaka, she does what's called psychotherapy, which is where, she's dealing with how, she deals specifically with the sisters, but a part of that is also the brothers in the barbershop. And there are other organizations that are going out and helping to train, beauticians and barbers how to, also engage their clientele and help them to get in touch with the resources that they need while they're in the throes of it.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I just saw a comment about strength and courage, and it does take, strength. It's not to say that a person is weak to go and try to find, assistance, and it shows a strong aspect of the person that they have, like you indicated, you have identified that something is going on. There is a history, and that you want to, do better. If we want others to do better, we also have to do the work to do better. And that is a very courageous act, to do that. And then again, if you have children, that shows them also that it is okay, so you're breaking that stigma and talking about, mental health, and you're talking, really, it's about emotional wellness and finding peace. And as you indicated, stability, within yourself. So I certainly, agree with all your points in terms of that. It takes the step to identify and then find, assistance, in that process. Certainly. Yep. So along with that, where can people find assistance? Where can men, like you said, do the therapists need to think differently and go to the barbershops and, go to the basketball courts or go to, the areas where men congregate? How can therapists, mental health professionals seek, to provide services, not clients, but to help, eradicate this? Because again, this movement, this protest can be handled in so many different ways. Everyone, I believe, can be a financial contributor. They can, march, but there's other ways to help this process.
Right. And so one of the things as far as how service providers can make themselves known and more accessible is to, work on your presence. I would say before working on your presence, work on your skill set. Because, we don't want to just jump out there and say, hey, I'm ready to work with Black men, and we out there jacking brothers up further. Because what they say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk and all kinfolk ain't necessarily skin folk. But you want that competency piece. You want to be rock solid and make sure that you are functioning and operating in integrity. But, and also to, as you said, go into these places where their brothers are to try to assist. And it doesn't mean that you're out there trying to recruit more clients, trying to secure the bag, but you're actually out there genuine. Because one of the things that we learned, I did training with Progressive Life Center here in the DC area, did my clinical training there. And we have an approach called Into psychotherapy. It's NTU. It's a Bakongo word, South Central Africa. But it's Into psychotherapy. And one of the first steps is harmony, meaning that we seek to establish harmony. We also deal deeply with authenticity. So you want to make sure that you're harmonious with the people that you're trying to work with, and that you also approach them with authenticity. You don't want to be fake, because, you know, we smell and see fake coming a mile away. And oftentimes that's what turns people off, is that we see that this person, it's a pretentious approach. You know, they coming for something. They're up here smiling in my face because they're trying to get something from me. Another thing that I would strongly suggest is that people go to the Association of Black Psychologists website. It's the Association of Black Psychologists. And on that website, there's a resource, there's a tab where you can find psychologists and service providers by state. And so you could browse that, and you could contact one, whether it's a man or a woman listed, and they could always give you other referrals in the area. And the other thing is that there's also a really good resource guide on the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation's website. In fact, we just launched, we're launching phase 2 of the free teletherapy services. And what we're doing is offering 5 paid sessions, you know, for people who are experiencing trauma right now. But it's a first come, first serve until the money is gone. So you can go there, find a resource guide on their website, and also sign up and get in line to receive some of these therapeutic services.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that those are excellent resources. So I certainly, you know, encourage people to go to the Association of Black Psychologists, as well as the Boris Henson Foundation. So one of the reasons we created the MECCA Moments were to make it more comfortable as well as casual to have these conversations, these much needed conversations that can be heavy, but also can a person can just engage in these conversations and find that information and then share it, you know, with loved ones and share it with friends that you may know might be going through something, whether it's grief or going through relationship hardships or, you know, financial, you know, situation, and just to, you know, share that information. Along with that, how can Black women, how can the sisters, provide support and help?
Yeah, that wonderful question there. Again, as I mentioned earlier, that whole battle of the sexes approach to this thing, it's not going to help us to win. It's not going to help us to get further. In fact, it's going to dig us in deeper. And so I think that when we hear things like, for example, Black men are the white people of the Black community, when people put the statistic out there that, you know, more Black women die at the hands of Black men than anything else, you know, that's not true. And we need to be able to check those false notions, you know, at the door, and try not to repeat them, you know, without substantiating those claims first, because that does nothing but draw a bigger wedge between us. Yes, domestic violence is very real. Yes, it's way too many sisters dying at the hand of brothers. Absolutely. I ain't denying none of that. What I'm saying is that when we make those blanket statements and we try to make Black men the enemy of Black women, you know, then what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up to continue to fail. One thing that the sisters can definitely do is to continually work on yourselves as well, you know, and encourage, the brothers to do the same thing. And I think one of the most important ways that Black women can help Black men is when it comes to raising Black men. When you have a son, just be very, very mindful that who you are working with is a future Black man. And so, you know, let's say, for example, that because, you know, people like to criticize men, call them F boys, and, you know, talk, you know, men ain't this, men ain't that. And when you look at the statistics, the vast majority of men were raised, you know, by a single mother. And so we have to understand that it's something about that raising process and that dynamic that they experience that helped to produce what it is that we're lamenting and complaining about today. Mm-hmm. And so what I say is that, you know, what we need to do is come back together as a family. Stop blaming each other. Brothers, if you out there making babies, you're going to have to help to raise your babies. Because what we know is that single parenthood, you know, is not the situation of choice for many people. It's not the optimal or prime situation, although we get wonderful people still out of single parent headed households. But we got to be more responsible on both ends. And so you asked the question specifically is how can sisters help and support? You know, I think the most important place is when it comes to raising our children. We got to understand that's our biggest commodity. That's our future. And so we got to figure out ways of parenting that will help to raise the best and brightest boys and girls who become tomorrow's men and women, so that we can eventually heal our families and heal our communities. And in this conversation, we won't have to have these kind of conversations anymore.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on that. I strongly support and advocate for co-parenting. You know, if the relationship is no longer there in terms of an intimate relationship, you're still partners for life. You're still partners in terms of raising your children together. You know, whether they're boys or girls, that has to be a union and an agreement of finding a way to have those communications that will positively impact, you know, your child, and not to have those, you know, arguments in front of the child, not to put the child in the middle, not to have those conflicts that are due to personal rather than looking at your role as a parent and securing that role as a parent. So I certainly agree that there has to be support on both ways. You know, everyone, again, has to do their part. To look within themselves to see what healing that person needs to do, because there are a lot of women that need to do healing, as well as be supportive and patient for those men that have to do healing. You know, especially, you know, again, not during this time of such mass chaos. Like, this is a time to come together, you know, to be, you know, supportive of one another.
Right. I talk to a lot of young brothers who are having issues with their mothers, you know, whether it's, you know, constantly being fussed at and yelled at, you know, something of course, they always feel like it's unfair and like they haven't done anything. But, you know, once we cut through the unfair part of it, and I'm able to help them to see clearly the dynamic that they're dealing with. And after that part, what my goal is to help the young brothers to, you know, to take responsibility and from an empathic stance and understand, you know, where their mothers may be coming from. You know, in particular, this happens a lot when I'm talking to boys who are raised by their mothers and their fathers aren't around. You know, they get the frustration, they get the, you know, they're, especially if it's an only child situation, you know, they're the sole recipient of, you know, the frustration that mom might be feeling, the day-to-day anxieties and the heavy that she has to carry. And so, you know, what I try to tell the young brothers to do is just understand that this is an opportunity for you to grow and refine yourself. You know, take the criticism, the constructive criticism, or take the criticism constructively, even if it's not coming in that way, and try to apply that to enhancing your day-to-day movement. So if you're getting fussed at for, you know, for not taking the garbage out, think about that and say, okay, how irresponsible is it? You know, you did not prioritize, you know, the cleanliness of your home. So I try to help them in that way, kind of firm them up. But, you know, it's really difficult, you know, to be a single parent and to take care of all kinds of responsibilities, especially when you got a growing boy in the house, you know, that's trying to find his manhood. And he feels that his developing manhood is constantly being challenged, and not only challenged, but sometimes stomped out, you know, by the woman in his life, which happens to be his mother. You know, so it sets up a serious conflict, and we got to do more work around helping young brothers to mature and go through their rights into manhood.
And again, and to understand their feelings and their emotion, you know, as you speak about, it's to allow them to understand a different perspective, to understand the role of their mother and where she's coming from, and to acknowledge that, not to be silenced, because I think so many times children are silenced and not allowed to express their feelings, express their thoughts. And it is, you know, very helpful to the child to know that they have a voice, and they have to learn how to communicate that their feelings and their thoughts effectively, and that raising their voice or using profanity or stomping away is not an effective way of communicating, because that can then lead to their relationship with their friends and their, you know, intimate relationships, or even in the workplace or in school settings.
Yep. Emotional maturity, not lack of emotion, but mastery of emotion. Yep.
Excellent. We need to say that again.
Not being emotionless, you know, but masterful of your emotional state. Absolutely. Got to be emotional masters.
Wonderful. So going back to how can the community, we spoke about the work that Black men, you know, can do, the work that Black women could do. How about the community? What is it that the community needs to also do and provide for Black men, so that they can help to, you know, guide them and assist them with this, you know, healing and emotional wellness?
One of the things that Dr. Francis Cress Welsing always talked about is the need for Black self-respect. And that's in the family level, that's on the individual level, and it's definitely on the community level. And so what we see right now, just based on the news media and, some of the places that I've driven through since the uprisings or riots have been taking place, is we see that, we don't seem to be valuing our communities, but we do. But we just do it in such a way that, it leaves us vulnerable and susceptible to other people and other people's wills and desires for us. So what I say to the community, one of the first things the community could do to improve our situation is to develop self-respect, to see ourselves as valuable. Mm-hmm. And what that requires, though, is for us to buck against the narrative that's being, played out over and over and over again, telling us that, we ain't worth nothing. Mm-hmm. We're expendable. We are the worst things on this planet. We're suffering still from the curse of Ham, claiming that our brown skin is a curse. All this type of stuff is still constantly in play. And so what we need to do as a community is to develop standards. And if standards already exist, and in many cases they do, just kind of adhere to those. We have to be courageous enough to begin to say no. We need to be courageous enough to just draw the line on certain things and say, this ain't going to happen on my watch. When people try to come and begin to tear up a particular neighborhood, the people in that neighborhood should stand strong and not allow that to take place. But again, it can be very risky at times, because what happens is that you may be going up against somebody who is ready and willing to kill and die to do what it is that they choose to do. And so it's going to take a all hands on deck approach to this. Start to raise our children in love, meaning that we're giving them unconditional love as we're raising them. We're teaching them to love themselves, teaching them to value themselves, so that when they do face these crossroads and have these opportunities to participate in self-destructive behaviors, they're less likely to go for that. And the more people in the community that we can have that are loving themselves, valuing themselves, and pushing back against that popular narrative that Black people are cursed and ain't hitting on nothing, the more we get pushing back against that, the more protective we will be. And our next generations will begin to come through in a more healthy manner. And before we know it, it'll be a critical mass of healthy people in our communities on the front lines doing this work for us.
So as you say that, I think about the movie industry. We're often, especially now, everything is streaming. We're constantly watching, movies, films. So what do we do when we want to support a Black director, producer, but the films are not always reflecting the Black man in a healthy, way? They might use the Black female as the heroine, but the Black male is, the predator, the bad guy.
Right.
So what do we do?
Yeah, I'm an appreciator of art. I love art. I can watch, just about anything and find something in it that I can enjoy, or at least, deal with and grow from, or, have a conversation about. And I think that we can use all media. I think we can use it all as teachable tools, or tools for teaching. I did a workshop not long ago on Queen and Slim. I used Queen and Slim as a catalyst to talk about, Black men and women relationships. And, one of the things that I first noticed in that movie, like I told myself, I wouldn't have made it to the opening credits if I was dude. I would have left the sister sitting right there in that diner at that table, and I would have called an Uber for her, and she would have went home in an Uber. I wouldn't even took her home because she was risky. So I used the movie that way, because in that movie, they call it, there was that trauma, that struggle, love, and but it started off with, the Black man, being talked down to by this sister. She came at him very negative from the jump. And if you watch that movie with that critical eye, you see that every situation that he got in throughout that movie was because of something on her end, her impulsivity. And so I'll take that as one of those types of movies that portray Black men weak, in a weak way, and even portray Black women in not such a healthy way. But, I say we could do it all. I mean, we could watch it all, but just have a critical eye and be able to analyze it and dialogue about it and be able to point out. So in other words, don't just watch movies for entertainment. watch them critically, because every movie has something in it that you can learn from. Yeah, because they put a lot of money into movies. Hollywood is a major machine that's psychologically informed, right? And so if you approach movies and entertainment that way, then we stand a better chance from being able to utilize them for our benefit.
I again agree with you, because as an educator, as a faculty at Howard, I often speak about, I know it, fellow Bison, and we have a lot of guests that have been Bison, a little trend here, but I often use film and documentaries in our, discussions, because I am, again, working with, students who are clinicians, soon to be clinicians, working out in the field with children to young adults to the elderly regarding mental health issues. And I use film in that way to give them an example. We have discussions around that. And that, again, it's not to, to give it the thumbs up or a thumbs down on the film, but to, dissect it and to see what was the message, and did they, how did the actors portray these particular characters regarding mental health issues? One that I use is often Manic with Don Cheadle. And I use that for a group counseling class, and the struggles he has as a Black therapist, working in a residential setting. So I do think that even with your children, if you watch a film, I watched Just Mercy with my daughters, and my eldest, who's 10 years old, we had a discussion about that. And that was before this, unfortunate incident. So it is certainly where parents have, as educators and community members, can have movie screenings, and to have engaged in conversations, not just for free tickets to a movie, but to engage in those conversations about the film.
Right. Very important. They're powerful teaching tools. I mean, I reference movies all the time in my workshops, my class lectures, and it trips me out though, because as my student population gets younger, I'm not getting older. As they get younger, some of the references that I have, I start realizing, like, I got to put them onto a whole nother genre of movies, right? And so it's good, because movies are a major part of culture, right? Entertainment is, period. And we would, at one point in time, we weren't so careless with the imagery and the message that we were putting out there in the world. And so now that there seems to be a free for all, especially with these front-facing cameras, these things are the devil. You know what I mean? The front-facing camera is the devil. Because now everybody's on stage, and so everybody can put their message out there. All they got to do is get enough followers, and they can influence so many people, right? And so I think that what that does is it increases the responsibility on our side to now, because we can't shut that down, we can't stop that from happening, but it's for us to step up and begin to help them to think critically and analytically and synthetically in order to dissect and put things back together, so that they're not just blind recipients of whatever it is being pumped out there to them these days.
Yes, yes, the social influencers, that term, and I'm like, okay, what is it that you did, and what kind of impact are you having on that audience that you have? What are you exactly doing? Right. TikTok videos are fun. I've done them, with my daughters, but I tried to be careful on the songs that they select, and I monitor again what they're watching, and certainly advise parents to do that, but again, who are they following? Why are they so engaged and captivated by these individuals? From so many athletes have not wanted to be role models, but they have taken on that role when they have stepped into the spotlight, and they have to, understand that. And, again, say it again.
I was going to say that whole notion of following, like, that whole notion of follow me that the social media uses, to me, I saw the psychology behind that. It's like, okay, we're encouraged to follow certain people, especially our children and the youth. And we don't necessarily ask, well, where is this person headed? Right. And we just jump in line to follow. And I know it's like follow, what they're posting, but you're still agreeing to be led. And we don't ask enough questions about, who it is that we're following and where they're actually leading us. And a shameless plug real quick, it's part of the reason why I wrote this book, Practical Psychology, right? Okay. And I started off talking about the media influence and how we can learn certain things about psychology that help us, especially when we're dealing with stuff like right now with social justice movement arising. So I deal with like 5 different areas of psychology, and I try to make them plain. I deal with emotions, consciousness, personality, identity, and learning, and the conditioning sense of learning. And it's to help people to become less susceptible to these extraneous influences, these subtle influences. There's a documentary, speaking of movies, I watched it yesterday. It's called The Great Hack. It's on Netflix. Okay. And what it talks about is how the data was mined from social media, Facebook specifically, and then used to sway elections, not just in the United States and not just Brexit, but also down in the Caribbean, like Trinidad and Tobago got hit, St. Kitts and Nevis got hit. And what they did is they came up with these trendy campaign marketing materials to influence people's, not only their mind, but also their behaviors. And there's a Madonna, she has I think it's called Let's Dance. She has a company where they develop viral videos. And so like it was, I think it was the Whip and the Nay Nay, where that whole thing was created. It seemed like it organically took off with people doing their own videos and they making their own videos organically, but actually they had paid actors and actresses creating these videos, and there was an entire machine behind them to make them go viral. So then they'd be more likely that other people would participate in making these things go viral. I mean, it's a heck of a process. And if we're not aware of what's going on behind the scenes, we can get caught slipping, and our children are the most vulnerable.
Certainly. So unfortunately, between 4 to 6% of psychologists, and just in the field of psychology, are African American. Okay, so if you're in DC, you can find a Black therapist, but there are some areas where people may not have access to a Black therapist in their immediate surroundings. What should they do? What can they do?
Right. And so what I would suggest to people who are experiencing the inaccessibility of culturally competent therapists, one of the best things that you can possibly do is to develop what we call self-knowledge. Begin to study not only the hardships of enslavement and colonialism, but begin to study the more healthy and positive aspects of your African heritage. And with that, what you do is self-knowledge is oftentimes in the Black psychology or African psychology literature is considered to be an inoculate. It's considered to be an agent of intervention that not only helps to prevent, you succumbing to the onslaught of racism and white supremacy, but also to help to keep you impervious to it. So self-knowledge helps to build you up. It's what allows you to align yourself, mind, body, and spirit. It helps you to build enough self-confidence to where, you are not depending on external cues from your environment and those people in your environment to feel like you're worth something. You're not looking external for self-validation. You're doing it for yourself, regardless of that. And so if you have that, if you are finding that you are in a situation where you can't find a Black psychologist or a culturally competent therapist or coach or whatever, begin to seek self-knowledge regardless. But then we got all this technology now, and I can't assume that those people will also have access to consistent internet or whatnot. But what's happening right now is that we're understanding that technology can be used to also provide these services. And so, step out there, go on one of those websites that we talked about earlier, ABSI or the Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, and you'll find people who are readily available to provide services to you online, through telehealth, the mental health networks and things of that nature.
Okay, certainly. So what other resources do you have, or can you share with us as we are closing out this segment? And how can people, contact you? Because what we're also doing, along with, posting the MECCA Moments to share, is also to share resources, share websites. And I will certainly, place the titles of your books, and, how can someone access and get those? We know of some of again, I can only speak of in the DC area, we have Mahogany Books, we have Sankofa Books that are Black-owned bookstores, but other than that, can we find some of these resources through Amazon, through Barnes and Nobles, as well?
Yeah, a lot of the books are already available, but some of the other resources I would like to point out that don't necessarily require reading is yoga. I'm a certified comedic yoga instructor, and it's a brother named Yasir Rahotep. Big burly dude. We call him Beowulf. He up in Chicago, dude straight out the Chicago streets. But what he's done is he's grown and developed himself over the decades to be literally a yoga master, teaching us the African forms of yoga. And so when you go through the comedic, the yoga skills method of yoga training, and you apply that to your life, what you are doing is actually applying therapy to yourself. That's self-care. And so I strongly recommend everybody get into some type of physical healing arts like yoga, like, deep meditation and breathing. Make sure that you're getting your stretch on, make sure that you're exercising. Diet is so important. I mean, I can't stress that enough to where, and I'm an advocate for people doing something better today than how you did it yesterday. And so, if you usually eat 5 cookies every day, cut it back to 4 today, 4.5. I give you that other half. If you, whatever it is, just improve upon yourself daily. Apply things to your life that may be quote unquote non-traditional and that the rest of your crew may not embrace, but still take steps towards healing and improving upon yourself daily. Yoga, meditation are 2 resources that you can begin to apply like immediately. As far as the books and stuff are concerned, all of mine are available at my website. You can also contact me. It's mindonthematter.com. That's mindonthematter.com. Mindonthematter.com. On Facebook, I am the real Dr. Jeff Menzise. And on Instagram is at Dr. Jeff Menzise, DrJeffMenzise.
It's certainly been a very real conversation, and I certainly thank you, Dr. Menzise, for the work that you have done to help build the MECCA Group. And, Dr. Mack and I certainly have enjoyed our time in working with you. And we're doing these segments to have these conversations. So thank you for providing all of your knowledge and the information that you have shared, with our viewers, so that it again can continue to break this stigma as the work what you're doing with the Boris Henson Foundation, to really, as we want to stop racism and we want to dismantle that, we need to dismantle the stigma within our own community as well. And this regarding mental health is on the forefront, certainly should be on the forefront as we face, issues of suicide, of issues of depression and anxiety, abuse, trauma, certainly. So I thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. I will certainly post the resources on our Facebook page as well, and on the on our website. So thank you again for speaking with us.
And so, Dr. Ebanks, thank you for the invitation. And also want to tip my hat to you, the MECCA Group. Y'all are doing phenomenal work. 15 years in the game, right?
14. We're almost there. 14.
14. I'm going to say 15. I'm speaking it into the future. Y'all going hard. And, really appreciate the work that you all doing. Heard about you all long before we connected. And, keep up the good work, y'all. You are a shining example for everybody out there to show that we can actually do this. We can be business owners. We can be professionals. We can really get this thing under our control. And that's our best bet. So yeah, thanks for the invitation, and really appreciate talking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you. So everyone, continue to do your part and do your work on your own, as well as how you can help others within your family, within your community. And it's Friday, so take some time to heal and to enjoy life. Thank you.